This is a webinar on AI and ChatGPT and health professions education. And here is our webinar series team. I want to give credit to the great team that helped put this together today. These 5 people and many more here at Lecturio worked very hard to put this series together for you. So I do want to say thank you to the team and give credit there. And I'll be one of your hosts today. I'm the Senior Project Manager of Learning Science here at Lecturio. My name is Dr. Sara Keeth. And right now I'd like to introduce to you my colleague, Dr. Adonis Wazir. So Adonis, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. So hello, everyone. My name is Adonis Wazir. I'm a medical doctor based in the UK, and I'm a medical education consultant at Lecturio. I'm also a master's student at the university, at Swansea University, where I'm getting my degree in medical education. I'm really happy to see so many people joining here. There's a lot of interest in AI, and judging from the questions that have been submitted, there's perhaps a little bit of concern about the emergence of such technology, but also genuine interest in how to make the most of it. But this is, I guess, not the first time that the threat of AI came knocking on our doors. Whenever a new innovation comes up, or whenever there's a conference about technology. I remember a few years back I was at a talk just talking about technology in healthcare. There was a subtrack on AI. There were some great presentations, but the questions that were coming in were very similar to the sort of questions we got in preparation for this webinar. So will AI replace us? Is it ethical? How do we use it ethically? Can we rely on it? How do we use it? How do we incorporate it into our practice? So those are questions that are still very pertinent today, especially after ChatGPT and other similar tools have taken center stage. So to help us answer some of those questions, I'm absolutely thrilled to introduce our guest speaker, Professor Phil Newton. Professor Newton teaches the evidence-based education module at the master's program that I'm enrolled in at Swansea University. He was also the director of learning and teaching for Swansea University Medical School, and he teaches neuroscience across a variety of programs. So he went to Swansea in 2009 from the University of California, San Francisco, having completed a PhD in biochemistry and molecular biology, and a BSc in biology at Aberystwyth University. He also holds a Master's of Science in Medical Education from Cardiff University, and he's given plenty of talks about ChatGPT and AI. Professor Newton, thank you so much for joining us, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks so much, Adonis, and welcome to everyone. I was thrilled to see that the first person to introduce themselves was from Touro University in Nevada, and Touro University in California was where I did my first bits of medical education teaching many years ago when I was working in San Francisco. So welcome to you all. Let me share my screen. And let me just make sure that you can see the slides. If I can get a nod from Dr. Keith or Dr. Wazir, okay.
We can see the presenter view.
You can see the presenter view. Okay,
yeah.
Let's try that something different then, shall we? Let's try one more time. No, that's not going to work either. Hold on. Gosh, you'd have thought after so many years of this, we would have been proficient in sharing screens on Zoom meetings, wouldn't you? All right. What about that?
Yep, this works.
Got it. Okay. So we're going to talk about academic integrity in the ChatGPT era, in the age of ChatGPT. I'm going to give you the punchline now. We've got more questions than we have answers, but there are lots of things that we need to think about, and I'm going to introduce some of those. As Dr. Wazir introduced me, I'm a neuroscientist by background. I spent many years in the University of California, came to Swansea to be part of setting up a new medical school. I've got 2 hats really, which have led me to be here with you today. The first is that I've done lots of research on academic integrity, on how we secure the integrity of our assessments, what might lead students and others to do things that they're not supposed to do, whether they know what they're supposed to do, and so on. All of these things that are relevant, I think, to our current consideration of ChatGPT. I'm also part of a team that teaches on the master's course in medical education in the Swansea University Medical School, as Dr. Wazir alluded to. It's an online course, and the ethos of the course is taking a pragmatic but evidence-based approach to learning and teaching and assessment. What does the good evidence tell us about how to teach and how to assess, but with a pragmatic view on it, recognizing that the standards of evidence that we apply to clinical practice might not always apply in education. And so with that hat on, that evidence-based education hat, I'm going to talk a little bit about what the evidence says about ChatGPT, about assessment and academic integrity. There is a lot of talk at the moment about ChatGPT and other tools. We're going to talk about ChatGPT mostly, but wherever we're talking about ChatGPT, we might also be talking about other generative AI tools, other large language models. The evidence is often somewhat different to the current media coverage and the hyperbole, and obviously we need to focus our discussions and considerations on the evidence about what it can do and what it can't do. Before I get into that, I'm just going to tell you a very brief story about academic integrity in online exams from a systematic review that we did last summer in an era that you might call pre-GPT. Before ChatGPT had occupied us all, myself and one of our medical students did a systematic review, basically asking how common it was for students in any discipline in higher education to cheat in online exams. And the reason we did that is because there was a lot of media concern about the thought that students cheated a lot during COVID-19. And this concern was then leading us to consider whether or not we carried on implementing many of the innovations that we used during lockdown learning during the COVID pandemic. And I was really concerned about this. It felt like we learned a lot about how to teach and to assess online during COVID, and a lot of that learning was slipping through our fingers. And I wanted to see what the evidence said about how common it was for students to actually cheat. The punchline is that cheating in online exams is remarkably common. So you can see here on the right-hand side a graph from our study where we asked all these a systematic review of studies that ask students some version of a question, have you ever cheated in online exams? And you can see that before COVID, a lot of students were cheating. During COVID, a lot more students were cheating. Perhaps even more students were cheating than were not. So it does seem that actually cheating went up during COVID, and that it was actually quite common to start with. The main reason for me showing you this graph, though, is because many of the studies that we reviewed as part of this systematic review, they ask students some version of a question: why did you cheat in an online exam? If you were cheating, why did you do it? As a way of trying to help us all understand it. So Kearney, Essex and I, we reviewed all of those data as well and came up with a sort of summary of the reasons why students said they were cheating in online exams. And to give you the punchline, the most common reason why students said they were cheating in online exams is because they can. Now, this might seem quite obvious, but it actually tells us a lot about the motivations that people have for committing academic misconduct. During COVID in particular, students would log into an online assessment and there would often be very few security measures put in place to guarantee the integrity of that assessment. And that told students a couple of things. It told them that the university perhaps wasn't all that concerned about whether or not they cheated in their online exam. And it also told them something that's very relevant for health professions education, which is, if it's so easy for me to cheat as a student, then it's easy for everybody else to cheat. And many students in health professions education are evaluated by comparison to their peers. And so if it's very easy for their peers to cheat and their peers can get a better mark by cheating, then the students were thinking to themselves, well, why wouldn't I cheat? Because I'm going to put myself at a disadvantage if I don't. So the starting position in this pre-ChatGPT era was that students are already cheating a great deal in online exams, and they're cheating because this infrastructure makes it easy for them to do so. I'm going to take one brief aside to tell you a story about this magnificent creature, because when we talk about academic integrity, particularly when we use the word cheating, there is a lot of concern about students' motivation for cheating. Are students cheating because they don't know what's expected of them or not? And maybe we need to reframe the language that we're using. And a lot of this is all valid, but I do just want to illustrate some of the principles which underlie the concerns we have about cheating and ChatGPT by explaining, a small piece of data from a field completely unrelated to health professions education, completely unrelated to higher education in general, really. And that comes from the world of traffic management, and in particular, humans' behavior around fixed penalty speeding cameras. So you'll all be familiar with these in some form, no matter where you are in the world. Most countries now, in order to try and manage the incidences of people speeding on their freeways, on their highways, on their roads, they put in place cameras that detect when someone is speeding. In the UK, the data from the government tells us that at any one time on our motorways, our freeways, our express highways, if the traffic is moving freely, about half the drivers are speeding. About half of them are cheating. So it's not just students, it's that all of us in general do things that we know that we're not supposed to do. The kangaroo here comes from a phenomenon in this literature known as the kangaroo effect from the field of traffic management, and it describes this behavior that's shown here on this little animation. Whoops, excuse me, let me make it play through. So here in the center of the screen, let me change my pointer, you have a camera that's designed to detect a speeding driver. Here you have a driver, and the color coding indicates that when the bars are orange and red, they're speeding, and when they're blue and green, they're not. And what this shows you is that incidences where we put in measures in place to manage people's behavior to try and prevent them cheating, then they are effective, and that most of us, or at least a significant number of us, are cheating when the circumstances make it easy for us to do so. All right, let me change my pointer back off. So the punchline then is that people are more likely to cheat if it's easy to cheat. It's not just students, it's not health professions education, this is people in general. And the reason why we're so concerned about ChatGPT is because, as I'll show you, it makes it very, very easy for people to cheat. So what can ChatGPT do? Now, we could spend a week showing you all sorts of examples of the incredible things that ChatGPT can and can't do. What I'm going to do is just show you a couple and just remind us that we're not just talking about ChatGPT here, we're talking about a whole range of potential innovations, large language models, generative AI, etc. I'll pause just a second because a blue line has appeared on my screen. I don't know if you can see it on your screen. Dr. Keith and Dr. Wazir, you can. Okay, I didn't put it there, so I don't know what it is or why it's there. But let us proceed regardless. I don't think it's going to make too much of a difference. So most of the early attention around ChatGPT was focused on its apparent ability to write essays. And this is one area where the evidence and the media coverage have not been always completely aligned. The punchline is that ChatGPT, the current versions of it, and other tools are really good at writing essays. And I'm going to show you just one example of this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you an example of me asking one of these tools to write this essay. And the essay I'm going to ask it to write is write a critical appraisal of the theory of learning styles. Is it effective? Cite some sources to support your conclusion. And the tool that I'm going to use is Google Bard. So it's not ChatGPT, it's a different one. And there's a couple of reasons why I've chosen this particular topic. One of them is it's a Trojan horse for me to tell you that if you've been told that matching instruction to learning styles is an effective approach to teaching, it's not. The evidence is very clear that it isn't. But that's the second reason why I've chosen this topic, is that we are told as educators that matching instruction to learning styles is an effective way to teach. There is a huge amount of information out there that advocates for many of these theoretical approaches that come under the umbrella of learning styles, and none of them work. And so the reason I've picked this topic is because if I ask Google Bard to write an essay on it, I want to know whether Google Bard can distinguish between the minority of evidence, which tells us that learning styles are not effective, and the vast majority of the narrative out there in its training materials, which will tell us that it is. So here is me typing that same question that I just showed you into Google Bard. And I'll tell you now that it's going to take me longer to type it in than it is for Google Bard to give me a response. So we simply enter the question in, and this is a free tool that's currently available to anyone. Google Bard thinks about it for a second or two with its twirling stars, and then in the blink of an eye, we get some text. Now, I didn't tell it how long this text should be. If I told it to write a 3,000-word essay, it would have written 3,000 words, but that would have made a terrible slide. So we're just going to show you the couple of paragraphs that it's written. Now, you don't need to read the content on here. Just trust me that I'm going to tell you that what Bard has written here is accurate and that it correctly summarizes the evidence about learning styles, which is that they're not effective. And the 3 references that it's given there at the bottom are good. They're accurate. They are the sorts of references that I would expect to see in a student assignment on this topic. If I had done this, I did do this 10 times because, as you may have observed by now, I'm a nerd and I spent a lot of time trying to get my head around these tools. So I gave Bard this question 10 different times, and 10 times it gave me 10 different answers. Every single one of those answers was basically correct and gave me references that were more or less of the caliber that I would expect to see in this sort of assignment. So it did a really good job. This leads us on then to a question that came up repeatedly in the questions that many of you submitted before the webinar, which is, what about the tools that we have, that people have proposed that we can use to detect text that's written by AI? Now, here is where evidence and research evidence bump up against policy and basic ethics and morality. The best way for me to summarize this, I think, is from a recent media headline regarding one of the most recent tools that was launched. This was the tool that was launched by Turnitin, the program that many of you will be familiar with. It's an originality detection software that detects unoriginal text in student assignments. And they've built an AI detection tool, and it's mostly accurate, according to at least their evidence. They, I think, were saying that it was 97 to 99% effective, i.e., if you took 100 assignments, 97 to 99 of them that were written by AI would be picked up as being written by AI. The media coverage, however, highlights the 1%, and that's quite a high false positive rate. And here is a story where a student who'd written an assignment was told that the AI detection software had flagged them as having written it, even as AI having written it, even though the student had written it themselves. So I think the basic accuracy of it is a concern, but more importantly for me, I think, is the false positive rate. Anyone who's ever had to investigate academic misconduct, if you think that 1 in 100 of your students are going to be falsely accused of having written text using AI when they haven't, that is a huge number of students. And accusing a student of having cheated, which this would be when they haven't, is a very traumatic experience. And it's especially so when we're talking about students on health professions programs where there is a fitness to practice concern on top of that. I also think that these tools, they probably don't capture the way that students are actually using them. It's all very well getting a student inputting an essay question into an AI tool and then copying and pasting the response into their assignment brief. But the reality is that students are going to get a first draft from ChatGPT, and then they're going to paraphrase it, which is going to make it harder, or edit it at least, make it harder for the tools to detect it. As with all these originality detection software packages, we have some concerns about where the information has gone once it's fed into them, and some concerns about where the information has gone once it's gone into ChatGPT. And then there is a body of evidence emerging, which are a couple of references for at the bottom there, that the essays generated by ChatGPT and other tools are actually better than the ones that are generated by students, which then leads us to question the basic validity of essays as an assignment methodology in the first place. And I'll come back to that towards the end. Okay, so I'm going to show you now then some of the data we have about ChatGPT's performance on multiple choice questions. And these are of particular relevance because at every stage of health professions curricula, there are high stakes summative exams that are based upon high level problem solving multiple choice questions. So getting into a program, graduating from a program, and then specialty training on a particular discipline. So myself and another one of our 2B medical students, we are doing a systematic review of ChatGPT's performance on formal exams that are based upon multiple choice questions. And I'll spare you all of the details on it because there's a huge amount that we've done so far. I'll just give you some punchlines from the studies that we found that have looked at ChatGPT's performance on formal multiple choice question based exams in health professions education. Actually, I'm just going to show you the ones from medicine. You'll have heard about some of these, the media stories that ChatGPT can pass the United States medical licensing exam, the USMLE, for example. The data are a bit more mixed. So here are 3 studies that have looked at whether ChatGPT can pass the medicine admissions tests, one in China, one in Italy, and one in the US. And it's a mixed picture. It could qualify for entry to medical school in a couple of countries. It would fail to get in the US. If we look at the exams that students have to pass to graduate medical school, to be registered as doctors, then ChatGPT fails most of them. It passed with a modest mark one of the exams done in the Spanish language. It was administered in Spain, but it failed the exams in Japan, China, and in the US. What I'm showing you here is a summary of very many studies, and I'll give you a bit more of that detail on the next slide. Interestingly, when it comes to specialty exams, so doctors have graduated, they've qualified, they're practicing, they want to go on to become what in the UK we would call a consultant, a specialist, high-level doctor in a whole variety of different disciplines. ChatGPT does pretty well on those specialty boards. It passes the ones in neurosurgery and oncology and clinical informatics, fails some others. Most of these are studies from the US. The punchline here is that ChatGPT actually doesn't do very well on these exams, at least the old ChatGPT. Some of these studies have used the newest version of ChatGPT that's based upon an updated large language model called GPT-4 that was released just over 2 months ago. And in every exam that GPT-4 versions of ChatGPT have been tested on, it's passed them and it's done a whole lot better than the older versions of ChatGPT, the ones that are currently free. And if I give you a bit of more insight into that, because I think it's really important. When we're talking about ChatGPT, or even when we're talking about LLMs and AI, generative AI in general, the different tools have very, very different capabilities and powers. And the most up-to-date version of ChatGPT based on GPT-4 is astonishingly good at pretty much everything that it's been asked to do, including the sorts of exams that we would set students and qualified professionals. So here is some detail. I apologize for there being lots of data, but I think it's important just to give you a flavor of the detail here. And again, let me change my pointer so I can show you. We have lots of different medical licensing exams from a variety of different countries, variety of different years, and different versions of the same exam. So we've got Japan, China, the US, etc. Here you have the difference between ChatGPT's performance and the pass mark for that particular iteration of that particular exam. And the headline I've already told you is that ChatGPT doesn't do very well. It passes a couple of them, but GPT-4 passes all the ones that it's been tested on. And these gray bars show you the magnitude of the difference, which is profound. It's about 20 to 25 percentage points better than the old ChatGPT, and it's comparable, if not better, than the average human student. So it's really powerful stuff. Summarize then the sorts of things that ChatGPT can do. It can write essays, it can solve complex problems, whether they're multiple choice questions or short answer questions. We haven't talked about its ability to write academic papers, but it can. And the creators have some astonishing videos of it being shown a picture with some instructions about how to build a website, generating code and using it. Giving it text-based OSCE stations, so asking it to generate a narrative about how to interact with patients in a particular situation, it can do that as well, and much more besides. So what do we do? Now here's where things get even more complicated. There's lots that has been proposed, and I will talk through some of those, and then we'll finish with the discussion points. I think the most important thing to say is that we must not lose sight of our core values about what makes a good assessment. And that's what I'm going to focus the final few slides of my presentation. A good assessment is a measure of what someone can do. Now, we often use proxies of what someone can do, multiple choice questions, essays, and so on. Our best assessments in health professions education are the ones where a student is observed doing the thing that we want them to actually do in practice. OSCEs, placement-based assessments, and so on. We can't always do that for practical and patient safety reasons, but we need to perhaps do more of those in the era of ChatGPT. There's lots of things there, additional details that go into what makes a good assessment. Here are some principles from assessment theory. and a good assessment has to be valid, reliable, authentic, etc. We don't have time to go into the detail of all of these, but they're there as a reference. And then there are lots of slightly more binary considerations that we have to make when deciding what makes a good assessment and how we're going to deliver it. So the issues on the right are perhaps multivariate. There's lots of complexity and determines whether or not an assessment is reliable or inclusive and whether students have a good experience. And then there are some perhaps binary issues, whether an exam is or an assessment is invigilated, so observed directly by a person, or uninvigilated, whether it's closed book or open book, etc., and etc. And all of these things interact in complex ways that mean there are probably no easy answers to assessment design in the era of ChatGPT. So let's say we want to maximize the integrity of an assessment. Right, we want to make it as hard as possible for students to cheat. Now, remember the kangaroo, students will cheat, people will cheat if it is easy for them to do so. So if we're most concerned about that, then these are the sorts of things that we need to do. We need to have an assessment that's invigilated, that's closed book, that's in person, it's a real-time assessment, it's done there, it's done live. Higher stakes assessments create more motivation to cheat, so we want it to be low stakes. We want to delay the feedback so that the answers can't leak out, and we don't want to give students any idea about what they're being assessed on before they're assessed. These are all steps that we could take that would make it harder for students to cheat, but they would not make for a very authentic assessment. Students are going to be using these technologies in the real world, and the real challenge, I think, is how we make authentic assessments that account for that. Now, there is one narrative that's emerged in the literature on this topic that perhaps we should just scrap tests. Why are we doing multiple choice questions in the USMLE if students, without ChatGPT, if students are going to be answering these problems in the real world using ChatGPT? And the answer to that is because we need formative foundational knowledge in order to be able to do the jobs that we're training people to do. And I'll give you just one example of this. So here is a problem from the USMLE. You don't need to read all of this. I can just tell you that this is a scenario that presents a situation where a student has got, a 6-year-old boy has got scurvy. And the scurvy has been caused by not enough vitamin C in their diet. And as is common with the sorts of assessments that we use in health professions education, it's presented as a scenario with the relevant information and some irrelevant information. The question that's explicitly asked here is it most appropriate? It is most appropriate to obtain specific conditional history regarding which of the following in this patient. And the answer options given in the USMLE are here. And if we feed this question to ChatGPT, it gets it right. It says that you need to know more information about the diet, and it gives an explanation as to why. And the explanation that it gives is accurate, is rigorous, and is actually educationally very useful. So ChatGPT can solve this problem, and it can solve it very well. If we take a deeper dive, though, into what this problem is actually asking, the first few lines describe in more or less lay terms the presentation of a patient. What happens in the scenario then is that the physician examines the patient. So on examination, and then the rest of the problem describes what the physician observes when they have examined the patient. A student who has no foundational knowledge would not know what to look for in an examination, i.e., somebody without foundational knowledge could not treat a child with scurvy just using ChatGPT. And the same argument is made often using these things, smartphones. We have access to all the world's medical information, but having access to that information does not make us all doctors. The key is to know what to look for, when to look for it, how to use it, how not to use it, and so on. When the physician examines the patient, the scenario then gives us lots of technical terms about dentition, about this, the presentation of the skin. The physician knows to look for these things, knows what the technical terms mean specifically, and knows what they don't mean. Again, this is information that the physician would not have if they didn't have foundational knowledge, and a novice without this knowledge would not be able to solve this problem using only ChatGPT because they don't have this foundational knowledge. So foundational knowledge is essential for the sorts of higher order clinical reasoning problem solving that we expect health professions graduates to be able to do. And so This then leads us then to a really profound dichotomy, I think, the starting point for what we need to do in order to respond to the challenges posed by ChatGPT. We need to make sure that we deliver authentic assessments that allow for the incorporation of the use of ChatGPT. However, an authentic assessment is one that is uninvigilated, open book, online, asynchronous, and so on. An authentic assessment is one whose features are basically the polar opposite of the one of an assessment that is secure, i.e. where we have maximized the integrity. And that makes a really important problem for us. Summing up simply, if we want to test knowledge, skills, and understanding in the absence of ChatGPT, and hopefully I've persuaded you that we need to do that because it's really important, then we need to do it in a way that secures the integrity of the assessment. And that means invigilated, closed book, in-person, old-fashioned forms of assessment. That doesn't just mean exams. We're not advocating for a return to all sitting in gymnasiums in silence with pens and pencils, but it means that when we're assessing students' foundational knowledge, or we're assessing anything in the absence of ChatGPT, we want it to be, I should say, in the absence of ChatGPT, then it has to be in person, it has to be real time, and it has to be invigilated. Because, as I told you before, the kangaroo means if students have access to ChatGPT, then they're going to use it. If we want this assessment to be authentic, then I think we have to think about how we can assess students' ability to use these technologies in a way that reflects how they use them in practice. And here is perhaps the biggest black box, if you like, the greatest number of unknowns. How do we do that is an open question, I think, and anyone who tells you they've got the answers to this is probably someone you should run in the opposite direction from. I think the final point that I'll make about this is whether or not we should be doing this. Personally, I think it's probably too soon for us as educators to rush into designing assessments that assess students' ability to use ChatGPT, and there's a number of reasons why. The folks that have made ChatGPT and related tools are currently facing multiple lawsuits. Because this is such a rapidly evolving field. We don't really know the basis upon which ChatGPT is trained, and the answers that ChatGPT sometimes gives are wrong, and that is leading people to sue the creators for a whole variety of different reasons. Perhaps less hysterically, assessment should be preparation for practice. We want to design assessments that prepare people for their future practice. Do we know how it's being used in practice? Do we even have guidance for how to use it in practice? It's good, but is it safe? Is it good enough to make decisions on the basis of it? If you make a decision, who's liable for the decisions that are made by ChatGPT? If you ask ChatGPT to do something in your clinical practice and then you act based upon the answer, there is no defense that you used ChatGPT. So what does that mean for how we use it? We also have very little information about what actually happens to the information we put into ChatGPT and the information that was used to train it in the first place. There's all sorts of ethical, moral, legal questions for practice. So my final slide then is a summary. Again, more questions than answers. I think we have to expect a lot of disruption. If you're in the business of assessing students or trainees or practitioners, then the way that we do our assessments is not really set up to deal with ChatGPT, and yet it's here. So we should expect a lot of disruption. I think the most useful thing that I've advised people is if you haven't had a go, particularly if the things that I've shown you in this session have been eye-opening, then do have a go, because there's a concern, particularly amongst students and trainees, that the people that run our health professions programs, people that run our universities, don't really know what these tools can do. And so sleepwalking, excuse me, into the disruption of the type that I alluded to in that first line. You should remember that an assessment should be of what students can do. And what they're going to do is, if we don't stop them accessing ChatGPT, then they're going to do it because they're human beings, and it makes it so easy for them to achieve high marks that they're going to do it. What I didn't talk about is the fact that we're used to thinking at the moment about ChatGPT and Google Bard as standalone sites that we log into. But the reality is that this technology is already in search engines. It's going to be in Microsoft Word and PowerPoint and Excel. So it's going to be part of the everyday tools that we use, that our students use to complete their assignments. Many of them may not even realize that they're using it. I think we should therefore assess in person for the time being, but that doesn't mean we should use exams. It means we can do all sorts of wonderful things that aren't exams, because we need to assess foundational knowledge, and we need to assess that in the absence of ChatGPT. Okay, I'll pause on this slide just for a second. If you want to see any of the references that we've used about the material that I've covered, there is my email address if you've got any questions for me, and the YouTube channel with some of the content from our master's course and some of the videos I've recorded about this and academic integrity. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and hand back to Dr. Keith and Dr. Wazir.
Thank you so much for that informative talk. I really enjoyed hearing you discuss all of the problems and the challenges and what we need to look out for, and giving those warnings. What we'd like to do next, first of all, I want to thank all of you who submitted questions beforehand. We had literally hundreds of questions submitted for this webinar, and Dr. Newton and Dr. Wazir and I have read those questions. And so what we did is we tried to aggregate the questions into the topics that you were concerned about, that you wanted to know the answers to. We can't address every single question, but we want to take some time now to address, and especially to have Dr. Newton respond to some of these important ideas. And so first I'd like to ask Dr. Newton, we had a lot of questions about your topic from today, which are these concerns about AI, specifically about academic integrity, also questions about reliability and access. So is there anything else that you would like to add on that general topic?
Thanks, Dr. Keith. And yes, I am a nerd for this, so I could talk about this for days. I think the two main things, really. The first is that obviously what I've just talked about is lots of dire warnings about the impact of ChatGPT. And I think those are important, but those are obviously the short term. ChatGPT and related tools obviously offer us enormous opportunities for education, for assessment, and for practice in the field of health professions. My concern is that the short-term disruption is a thing that we have to deal with straight away. And we don't really know what it's going to look like in practice, in part because of some of the issues you alluded to about how accurate it is, who's liable, etc. I think the second point is that lots of us in lots of different fields, higher education, health professions, education, lawyers, etc., we're all beating ourselves up about what to do about this. And I think we need to take a moment to realize that this issue affects society. This is bigger than health professions education, and it is an issue that has societal impact. You saw one of the founders of AI resigning from Google because of his concerns about the potential impact of these tools on society. And I saw today another leading AI researcher, who I apologize, I can't remember his name. He was advocating for systems and processes internationally to manage these tools in the way that we manage nuclear power. Or in the way that we manage new medications. A new medication has to go through a series of approval steps. Maybe we need to put in place something like that to manage the release of new AI tools, considering the potential challenges they may pose and the harms they may cause alongside their benefits, and evaluating their efficacy. So there is lots of positives out there, I guess, is the first message, but we shouldn't kid ourselves that we can solve this by ourselves. This is a bigger picture, a bigger issue than just us.
Certainly, yes, thank you. We had also a lot of questions that involved AI for healthcare, diagnoses, cases, care. And so I want to ask you if you'd like to speak to that. And I also want to open it up to Dr. Wazir as an MD, who may also have some thoughts on how AI will affect, and maybe is already affecting, these aspects of healthcare.
That's a really good question. I think I'm going to default to Dr. Wazir to start with. I'm not a clinician, I'm not a physician. I certainly use it all day, every day in my teaching. I have it open all day, every day while I'm doing my research. My life has changed profoundly as a result of it, and I'm certain this is true for many of the hundreds of you who are here today. So over to you, Dr. Wazir, for your thoughts on this.
Right. Thank you. Yeah, and I had a look at some of those questions that were coming in, and it was really how will AI be used in the healthcare field? What are we going to do? Are we going to be replaced? And I think what I would just like to point out is, so I have reviewed a little bit of the literature, and I'm not talking out of experience with using AI in a clinical setting, but AI has been used in the clinical setting for quite a while now. Now, of course, within the realm of healthcare, there are different, so we're talking about different elements. It has been used, for example, in terms of administrative work, managing patient appointments and so on. But we are seeing more and more clinical uses, for example, in radiology with recognizing certain pathologic signs, or in pathology, for example, there was a recent study talking about how AI can help localize certain pathological findings to essentially save time and make the work of the pathologist more efficient. There's also some applications for surgery, some preoperative planning, and so on. But again, the point is, it is there, and there is quite a lot of research that's being published, high quality research published about this. But the issue that I realized is, when you go and you read through this research, there is a lot of technical jargon. That I'm not talking about the clinical jargon that we are used to. It's really technical, and it can be difficult to understand what are what are the abilities, or what's going on in the background of this AI. How is this AI actually working? Interestingly, there's also been a few published checklists that support clinicians with the critical appraisal of research published with AI. And that might be worth having a look at, just again, for someone who is a lay person, so to speak, or not an expert or not very experienced with AI. How do I really make sense of all of this, and how do I incorporate it into clinical practice, if I should at all? But this whole idea of being able to interpret and appraise what is out there got me thinking of another question that also was coming in a lot, which is, to what extent perhaps do we need to teach clinicians or teach our students how to use AI, or how to understand the technical aspects of it? Do we? Because it seems like we do need some certain level of basic understanding to be able to make sense of all of this.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And it's one of the challenges with proposing that we build it into our assessments in the short term, is that I certainly don't have the skills to know whether a student is using the AI effectively or not. And I'm going to be guess that I'm not alone in that. That, I think, is possibly where we need practice to lead education and lead assessment. Is we need guidance for how it's used in practice. And that includes not just the technical aspects of it, but the ethical, moral, and legal considerations of that. And that will then drive how we assess it, how we teach our students to use it. I'm certain also there's a related point that we perhaps haven't had time to cover, that all those of you who are seeing patients on a daily basis are going to be seeing patients who've asked ChatGPT what their problem is before they've come to see them. And that's another area where I think we need to advocate for practitioners to go ahead and use it themselves, put some common problems into it, and see the sorts of things that ChatGPT is going to be telling their patients, so they can prepare, and the sorts of common errors that ChatGPT might make, because it's certainly going to be something that, if it hasn't already started, is going to be very common in the not too distant future.
And speaking of those errors, we do have some questions about the accuracy of references and citations specifically. And we know that ChatGPT in particular hallucinates references or makes them up, from scratch. And so can you speak to that? Have you found something that's a little bit more reliable for academic work? That'll affect researchers and students, of course. And then also, how might that affect diagnoses? Are people getting inaccurate, medical information already from ChatGPT?
So I can certainly speak with some confidence about the first of those questions. This is something that early on it feels like a lifetime ago, but it was only a few months ago when ChatGPT first appeared. There was an initial burst of excitement about its power of writing academic essays, and then followed, as is often the case, with some some pitfalls and some problems and some concerns and some cynicism. It certainly, in its early days, hallucinated references and gave fake references because it was not designed to identify right and wrong. It was designed to put together text and narrative that was persuasive and convincing based upon what it had been trained on. My experience is that that has largely been fixed. I showed you the example with Bard. That example is a couple of months old now. All the references that it gave me every time I've used it have been accurate. There is occasionally some glitches in, with a comma here, a bracket there, but if I'd seen them in a student assignment, I wouldn't think twice about thinking they were the right thing. My understanding is that GPT-4 is the updated version of ChatGPT is much, much better at this. Many of you will be familiar with the journal Medical Teacher. They have a publication series called the 12 Tips, fantastic series, which is translating academic research evidence into 12 tips on a particular topic in health professions education. I asked ChatGPT, GPT-4, to write me a 12 tips article, and between me and GPT-4, we'd written something publishable in about 25 minutes. And the references that it gave me were all absolutely fine. They were not inaccurate at all. And I think perhaps the distinction is between the free ChatGPT and GPT-4, which is currently available only on a subscription service. I do believe that the latest version of the free ChatGPT is better than the older versions, probably still going to be making some mistakes, but certainly it's better than it was a few months ago, and it's only going to get better. In terms of the accuracy of the clinical information, I suspect an unhelpful but accurate answer is it depends. Certainly the clinical problems that I would use in my assessment of our students, when I feed those to ChatGPT, it gives me accurate answers, and it gives me reasonable differential diagnoses. It gives me explanations as to why the answers are and are not meaningful. And all of those are things that, in all the situations, the most up-to-date version of ChatGPT is accurate. When it comes to real-world situations and the information is being entered by patients who perhaps don't have background and technical knowledge, there I am less confident about its performance, and also less confident in my own knowledge about how accurate it is. The research that I've seen involves people taking questions that have been asked, say, on Twitter or on Facebook, and feeding those to ChatGPT and seeing how well it does on those. The general picture is that, in general, on average, it does okay, but not brilliantly. It's certainly, as I said, going to be something that patients are using, and I would guess we want it to be accurate, because if they come in convinced that they've got some condition X when the reality is it's something else, then that's only going to make everyone's lives harder. I don't know if Dr. Wazir, you've got a perspective on this.
I mean, the only thing I'd always like to add is I think where it stands right now, as it stands, the role of the clinician is still indispensable in assessing anything that comes out of ChatGPT or similar software. You could use it for prompts or to brainstorm, but at the end of the day, if it matters what you're talking about is true or not. So if you're talking to a patient, you always need the clinician there to really assess, especially in these early stages, especially if we don't know exactly how these decisions or this is being generated.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you for that. We also had a lot of questions about practical teaching tips. How, if we do want to use AI, if we do want to use ChatGPT in the classroom, in the online classroom as well, how do we do that? And I do want to let you know that Lecturio has produced a short article and a handout that you can download for that information. It gives some exercises that you can try. What I would mainly recommend is that you try it and see what you get, because as Dr. Newton has shared with us, these large language models are being updated very, very rapidly. And what you put in one time may get a different result than what you get the next time you try it. And so we give you some ideas to try, but it really is going to depend on you getting in there and seeing what kind of results you want to get and focusing on the quality of your prompts. That would be my thoughts on this. But I would also love to hear, Dr. Newton, your thoughts on how people can implement AI in their classes, in their teaching?
I think the simplest advice is just to have a go. It's, you know, I was teaching a module this semester on medical neuroscience. About a third of the way in, I just started having Google Bard open while I was teaching, because students would ask me questions all the way through the module, all the way through a session. I couldn't always answer. And so I just said, look, I'm going to ask Bard. And as Dr. Wazir alluded to, I don't think it was, I think it's a very useful complement to the human element of teaching and of practice. I found it really helpful to get Google Bard and then later ChatGPT's take on the answers to some of these questions. I encourage students to do the same. I think if you were doing something more small group or more interactive, you could just together ask ChatGPT some questions, or Google Bard some questions, or the other tools some questions, and see what the answers are that come out. There's a lot of talk about this idea of what's called prompt engineering, which is basically learning or becoming skilled at the sorts of things that you need to ask ChatGPT. So what gets you a good answer from ChatGPT and what gets you a bad answer? Now, this is an area where, again, I cannot claim to be any sort of expert. I asked ChatGPT this morning about how to do that, and its answer wasn't very helpful, if I'm honest. But I think doing that together, recognizing that we don't have time really to wait, because these things are here and our patients are using them. So in a small group session, learning together how to get information out of ChatGPT. What are the sorts of questions that get you one answer? What are the sort of questions that gets another? And also recognizing that point you mentioned, Dr. Keith, that you're going to get a diversity of responses, much like you would if you went to 10 different clinicians. You might get 10 slightly different responses. You're going to get the same from ChatGPT. So it's my long-winded way of saying I would just have a go. The other piece of advice that comes up frequently in the research that we've been reviewing is that students can ask ChatGPT and other tools to generate exam questions for them, or they can use it as a revision tool by feeding some of the questions to it. Asking ChatGPT to generate a USMLE style question, and then either you as a student in a group or as an educator with your class, asking them to critique it. Is this a good question? What's right and wrong about it? It's a really good real-time way of generating discussion points that are mostly going to be accurate with some common errors to spot, that's relevant and authentic in the real world, because this is exactly what your patients are going to be using. Those are my thoughts on it, at least for now.
Absolutely, thank you. And so we also had a lot of questions, and this is the final question I want to ask you for this part of the presentation. So Dr. Wazir, Dr. Newton, if you'd like to sum up your thoughts, what do we do? Where do we go from here?
I've been on this emotional roller coaster with ChatGPT. When it first came out, I was doing a project to try and design exam questions that could be used online that students couldn't cheat on, and ChatGPT drove a coach and horses through those. So we redesigned that project, and our guidance seemed to work really well, and we seemed like we could write questions that students couldn't cheat on. And then the new ChatGPT came along. And I was completely dumbfounded. I did not know. I had an existential crisis, I think it's fair to say. I did not know what we were going to do. I think in those 2 months since then, I think the main takeaway for me is that we probably need to calm down a bit, or at least I do. As I said, this is an issue that is bigger than education. It's bigger than health professions. It's bigger than medicine. And there does seem to be something of a slowing in the pace of development. I've seen many times this idea that although recent advances in ChatGPT have been very astonishing and very significantly large, it's now been trained on pretty much all of everything that humans have ever written. So there is an enormous amount of training material left with which to improve it. And it's probably more about applying it in specific circumstances and fine-tuning it. So maybe we just need to wait a bit. We need to let society work out what its values are with regards to these tools and what it wants to do about it, and let us be driven by the practice rather than feeling like this sense of panic that we need to come up with solutions to it. The only area where I think we do need to take immediate action is if we're using unproctored or uninvigilated assessments, so be essays or online exams. I think we need to stop doing that, because we're making it very easy for students to cheat, and the incentives for them to do so are very profound. So we need to go back to in-person assessment.
And one final question that I had for you, could you explain exactly why that phenomenon is called the kangaroo effect?
Yes, I should have done that. But every time I do it, it seems to add more, it seems to make things more complicated than it needs to be. So as I understand it, the kangaroo effect is because drivers will slow down and then they'll hop and then they'll speed up again. Now, actually, it seems to me like it's a reverse kangaroo effect, but the reverse kangaroo effect doesn't make such a nice picture. So, and that's what it's called in the literature. So it's because of the hopping of the drivers beyond the camera that it's called the kangaroo effect, as I understand it.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you so much. This has been incredibly informative and helpful for me, I know, and I hope also for all of our participants. And Dr. Newton, we so appreciate your time today, and especially the time of all the people who've chosen to come to this webinar. It's been an incredible hour. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to, in just a moment, share with all of you who'd like to stay some of the intelligent learning features of the Lecturio platform. But before we do that, I want to just tell you about a few things we have upcoming. So there is a handout that if you didn't catch the link in the chat, it will be coming to your email. So watch for that email from us with the handout. And there will also be a survey, and that email is the opportunity for you to take this survey and ask for a certificate of participation if you would like one. We also have an offering for you, especially if you are a student and you would like assistance coaching, preparing for things like the USMLE. Please use this QR code. This is something that Lecturio can help you with. We have coaching services. So this link is for the student coaching. Give you a moment. And in this QR code, if you are with an institution and you are interested in a coaching program that Lecturio could provide for your institution, this QR code is for you. That's something we would love to speak with you about. The coaches are trained to help you with that. And just as a reminder, you're going to get a handout and a follow-up survey. You can request a certificate on that email. And we will have more events coming up. We'll let you know when those will be, but I hope to see you all at our future events as well. We also offer faculty development workshops here at Lecturio. So Dr. Wazir, myself, some other members of our team, if you're interested in us having some more targeted interaction with your faculty at your institution, we'd love to do that. So please contact us. You can scan this QR code, or you can just send us an email, and we'd be happy to talk to you about that.